I was sitting on the bank of my own lake, line in the water, cattle murmuring in the dark behind me, when flashlights exploded across the shore and somebody yelled, "Hands where I can see him." Next thing I know, I'm face down in the dirt, cuffs biting into my wrists, while an all-too-familiar voice shrieks, "That vagrant is camping illegally by the water. Rout him up." Only problem? That vagrant was me. I'm Sheriff Jack Ralston, and this was Ralston Ranch, 47 acres my family's held since 1952, with Ralston Lake glittering like a piece of sky on the ground. The deputy pinning me down, Deputy Miguel Lopez, realized who I was halfway through the Miranda warning and whispered, mortified, "Sheriff, I'm so sorry. HOA called it in as a hostile trespasser. I didn't know it was you." Standing behind him, filming on her phone with a smug little smile, was Margot Kensington Blake, president of the Cedar Ridge HOA, queen of the brand-new subdivision Cedar Ridge Reserve that had sprouted like mold along my eastern fence line. White luxury SUV, white blazer, hair sprayed so tight a tornado couldn't move it, and that voice like sugar poured over broken glass. "Rules apply to everyone," she purred, loud enough for the body cam, the neighbors, and probably the satellites to hear. I swallowed the burn in my chest and kept my mouth shut, because I'd already decided something that night, with my face in my own dirt and a camera pointed at the back of my head. This wasn't just some busybody with a clipboard. This was a predator who'd picked the wrong pasture. Let me back up. I grew up on this land under the watch of my grandfather, Calvin Ralston, a man who could stare at a storm until it changed its mind. He taught me that when you own deeded dirt, you don't bow to bullies, you stand your ground. After 8 years as sheriff of Redstone County, dragging drunk drivers off highways and peeling families out of wrecks that still visit me in my sleep, this lake became my therapy. My marriage to Emily had gone quiet and brittle, like two trees grown too close then twisted apart. She kept the pretty house in town inside some HOA's grip, and I moved back to the ranch with my tent, my peace, and my ghosts. For a while, it worked. Then Margot Kensington Blake blew in from California with her white SUV, bought the biggest house in Cedar Ridge Reserve, and within 6 months, she'd clawed her way into the HOA presidency. Her campaign promise? Bringing proper standards to this community. Translation: I'm in charge now. Our first real clash came one evening while I was unloading fishing gear from my truck. Expensive tires crunched on my gravel, and out stepped Margot with her 2 lieutenants. Tommy Granger would have called them mall cops with clipboards. There was Pudge-style guy in a pressed polo, we'll call him Harold Denton, a retired insurance adjuster with dead eyes, and Delilah Crenshaw, a former planning clerk who looked like she sharpened her teeth on zoning codes. "Sheriff Ralston," Margot announced, voice dripping honey and contempt, "we need to discuss your recreational activities." She handed me a violation notice like it was a federal indictment. Unsightly temporary structures, non-conforming recreational use, $500 fine, 7 days to comply. For camping. On my own ranch. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my temper on a leash, "this property predates your HOA by 4 decades. I've got original surveys in my safe." Her smile didn't move. "Paperwork can be complicated, Sheriff. Rules are rules. This isn't the Wild West anymore." That's when Delilah Crenshaw leaned in and murmured, "Would be a shame if questions about your professionalism reached the county commissioners." They weren't just annoying. They were threatening my badge. I tipped my hat, swallowed the anger, and drove to town for gas station coffee that tasted like burnt rubber and regret. I thought I was dealing with a board control freak from California. I had no idea I'd just stepped into an organized crime ring wearing a cardigan and pearls. Within a week, my phone turned into a siren. County planning, environmental quality, State Water Commission, everyone suddenly had concerns about possible contamination and habitat disruption on Ralston Ranch. Deputy Lopez pulled me aside at the courthouse. "Boss, you need to see this." He showed me photos. Margot on the roadside with a telephoto lens, stalking my fence line like a paparazzi at a crime scene. Then he showed me her social media posts, dug up by a friend. In HOA groups, she painted me as the rogue sheriff who thinks his badge puts him above community standards. Hundreds of comments. Plenty of anti-law enforcement bile. One line made my jaw lock. "Sometimes you have to make an example of people who think they're untouchable. Badges don't make you special." That wasn't about grass height anymore. That was a declaration of war. Years in law enforcement taught me one thing: paper trails don't lie. So I spent the next morning in county archives, digging through records that smelled like dust and broken promises. That's when I found it. When Cedar Ridge Reserve was built, several houses, including Margot's, violated the creek setback by 15 to 30 feet. They were sitting on a flood easement, illegal as a $3 bill, and the planners knew it. Internal memos showed a corrupt clerk had been bought off to rubber stamp the permits. That clerk got fired in a scandal years back. I'd felt sorry for the homeowners then. Turns out, at least one of them had been in on the deal. My grandfather's voice rang in my head. Son, some folks don't steal your land with a gun. They steal it with ink. If my land ever got formally surveyed for development, those illegal houses would be exposed and demolition orders would follow. Suddenly, Margot's obsession with my tent by the lake made a cruel kind of sense. She didn't want peace and quiet. She wanted control or silence. I decided something important. I'd fight as Jack the landowner, not Sheriff Ralston. No badge, just a man defending his inheritance. At Dottie's Diner in Hickory Bend, the whole mess became small-town sport. The place smelled like bacon grease and diesel, and opinions came free with coffee refills. The old-timers backed me. Newcomers muttered about standards. Dottie, apron flour-dusted, started an informal betting pool. Odds were on me, but Margot had deep pockets and that big city brutality. Then the pattern emerged. Tommy Granger from the hardware store said she'd tried citing him for parking his work truck in his own driveway. An elderly widow, Mrs. Eleanor Price, was suddenly drowning in violations about her yard since her husband died. A young mechanic restoring a classic car got slapped with commercial activity notices. A Vietnam vet growing vegetables for therapy was hit with improper agricultural use. Every target was vulnerable. Every target got the same treatment: daily documentation, legal threats, then helpful whispers about selling and starting over somewhere else. I went home, fired up every database I could legally touch, and ran Margot Kensington Blake through them. What popped up made my stomach knot. 3 prior addresses in California and Arizona. 3 HOAs. 3 wars. Same pattern every time. She takes over the board, Harris's problem neighbors, and, like magic, those folks sell well below market to community-minded buyers tied to her family. One Arizona case had gone to court, sealed tight after settlement. I needed backup, not deputies, brains. So I called in my war counsel at Dottie's Diner. Emily, my ex, who'd once worked for a law firm specializing in HOA abuse. Deputy Miguel Lopez, tech-savvy and stubborn in the right way. Tommy Granger, 30 years of local gossip and construction knowledge. Dottie herself, queen of county intel. And Sheriff Hal Peterson, my retired mentor who'd smelled more corruption than most prosecutors. We spread documents across the table like battle maps. Emily traced the money. HOA dues used to pay for harassment letters, private investigators, and a paralegal digging dirt on vulnerable neighbors. Tens of thousands missing from community budgets. Miguel mapped the digital side. Private HOA Facebook groups trading playbooks on how to pressure residents, celebrate forced sales, and praise Margot like some kind of cult leader. Tommy and Dottie listed locals under attack. Mrs. Eleanor Price, the widowed gardener. The mechanic and his Camaro. The vet and his vegetable patch. All lined up like dominoes waiting to fall. Then Emily dropped the bomb. Jack, look at this. Margot's brother-in-law, Dr. Leonard Blake's cousin, runs the mortgage company that finances almost every distressed property purchase in her old neighborhoods. Same pattern. Harass, lowball, finance privately, flip for double. Cross state lines. Multiple players. Fraud disguised as neighborhood improvement. We were staring at a racketeering case in a power suit. When financial schemes cross borders, the feds get interested. Soon enough, Agent Cole Ramirez from the FBI showed up, quiet and sharp-eyed, with a folder already half full on similar property scams in other states. Our little HOA nightmare was the missing puzzle piece. Meanwhile, Margot escalated. She built a property standards committee, really just a spy ring. Neighbors took shifts monitoring my ranch with cameras aimed over my fence. My department started getting flooded with calls about suspicious camping, vagrants, ongoing trespassing. Most of those calls were about me. Then the threats turned physical. I woke up one morning to 4 slashed tires, my gate lock superglued, and a dead possum on my porch with a note. Smart men know when to quit. Shortly after, a new face stepped onto my property. Big guy, ex-cop vibe, shoulders like a refrigerator. Trent Doyle, a security consultant Margot hired out of Houston after he washed out over excessive force complaints. He watched me flip burgers on my grill and said, almost friendly, "Mrs. Blake wants to make this go away. 50,000 cash if you move somewhere more compatible. Otherwise, accidents happen to stubborn people." What he didn't know was that my body cam was rolling, and Agent Ramirez already had him flagged in other investigations. Every threat he uttered went straight into a growing federal file. 3 days before a county commissioner's hearing, where Margot was planning to paint me as the corrupt sheriff abusing his badge, she made her biggest mistake. She called a press conference. News vans from Dallas lined up outside the courthouse. Cameras, microphones, the whole circus. Margot stepped up in a white dress and pearls, playing the sainted victim, voice trembling as she told reporters she was just a concerned citizen standing up to a sheriff who thinks he's above the law. What she didn't know was that the night before, Trent Doyle had been picked up for drunk driving and, staring down real-time plus enemies he owed money to, decided loyalty wasn't worth prison. He started singing. He confessed to threats, harassment, coordination with Margot, and similar security work he'd done for her in other states. The FBI practically rolled out a red carpet for his cooperation. And standing in that press crowd was reporter Jenna Morales, an investigative journalist who smelled something rotten. "Mrs. Blake," she asked, "how do you explain over $60,000 in HOA funds used for legal fees and consultants, while your community claims there's no budget for basic improvements?" Margot's smile glitched. "Those are routine administrative expenses handled by the board. And what about repeated reports of vulnerable homeowners selling below market value after intense HOA enforcement campaigns connected to companies tied to your family?" The crack in Margot's facade turned into a fracture. She doubled down, ranting about deep corruption and claiming she had evidence of sheriff misconduct that would blow the county wide open. The more she talked, the deeper she dug. 2 days later, the commissioner's hearing room was packed past capacity. Cameras, reporters, ranchers in boots, newcomers in polos, veterans in worn caps. On one side of the front table, Margot, in a black power suit, flanked by an expensive lawyer. On the other, me, in a pressed uniform, badge shined so bright it could blind, with Emily, Miguel, and a stack of binders that weighed as much as a sin-heavy conscience. Commissioner Paul Danner banged his gavel. "We're here to address citizen complaints about Sheriff Ralston's conduct in property matters." Margot's lawyer went first, waving photos, complaint logs, and witness statements from her HOA committee that painted me as a tyrant with a tent. Then Margot grabbed the mic and delivered her well-rehearsed speech about badges, power, and law-abiding residents under siege. When she finished, the room hummed with divided whispers. Commissioner Danner turned to me. "Sheriff Ralston?" I stood, felt 300 pairs of eyes on my back, and walked to the mic with my binder. "Commissioner," I said, "this started as camping on my own land. It's not about camping anymore. It's about this." I opened the binder. Bank records, property transfers, HOA budgets, internal emails, photos. For 5 years across multiple states, Margot Kensington Blake has used HOA authority to run a systematic property fraud scheme, harass vulnerable neighbors, drive down prices, then move properties through shell companies tied to her family's mortgage business. In Cedar Ridge Reserve, more than $60,000 in HOA dues have been spent on harassment campaigns, private investigators, and hired muscle like Trent Doyle, who is currently cooperating with federal investigators. Gasps rippled through the Cedar Ridge residents behind her. This isn't about me using a badge wrong. This is about a predator using rules, fear, and fake standards to steal homes. Margot shot to her feet, shrieking, "This is slander," when a calm voice from the back cut through everything. "Mrs. Blake," said Agent Cole Ramirez, stepping forward and showing his credentials, "you're under arrest for mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit racketeering, embezzlement of community funds, and making criminal threats against a law enforcement officer." The room went silent. You could hear the cuffs click around her wrists. "You have the right to remain silent," Ramirez added. "I strongly recommend you use it." She didn't. Of course. She screamed about setups and corruption as agents let her out, while at the side door, Trent Doyle was brought in, shackled, pointing straight at her. She paid me to threaten him and half this room. I've told the feds everything. Just like that, the Queen lost her crown. Afterward, Commissioner Danner apologized publicly for doubting me and asked what we could do to keep this from happening again. I pushed for mandatory HOA audits, stronger protections for elderly and low-income homeowners, and state oversight on harassment patterns. The Attorney General's office sent a representative who announced they were forming a task force to investigate predatory HOAs statewide, using our case as the model. 6 months later, I sat by Ralston Lake again, sunset painting the water gold, the same shore where I'd once been handcuffed on my own dirt. Margot took a plea, 8 federal counts, years of prison time, and over $100,000 in restitution. Her multi-state network collapsed. Properties were returned or compensated. Her ex-husband, Dr. Leonard Blake, handed over meticulous records he'd kept, then donated to a victim relief fund and vanished to another state. Trent Doyle served time and now testifies against property fraud outfits he once worked for. Her foreclosed house in Cedar Ridge Reserve? It's now a community center and legal clinic for HOA abuse victims, run in part by Emily, who turned our nightmare into a mission. We speak more kindly now than we did during our marriage. Funny how shared battles can heal old bruises. We host a campout for community every year on my land. Kids fish off a pier named after Mrs. Eleanor Price, who went from silent widow to the loudest voice at town hall. Veterans garden without fear. Families who almost sold in panic now sit around fire pits, swapping stories and phone numbers instead of threats and violation notices. The FBI turned our case into a training module. Agent Ramirez comes back twice a year to brief local departments on spotting this kind of slow-motion theft. A documentary crew bought the story rights. The profits helped launch a rural property rights clinic that answers calls from across the country. I still camp out on my own shoreline. Sometimes it's just me and the cattle. Sometimes it's half the county. Either way, the night feels different now, lighter, safer. Here's what I tell anyone who calls me from another town, another HOA battlefield. Document everything. Learn your rights. Talk to your neighbors. Bullies thrive on silence, shame, and people thinking they're alone. Because that's the real question this story leaves behind. When community rules become weapons in the hands of people like Margot Kensington Blake, where do we draw the line between order and oppression? Is it ever acceptable to look the other way because at least the neighborhood looks nice? Or do we have a moral duty to stand up, even when the bully is polite, well-dressed, and hiding behind bylaws instead of a gun? If it were your land, your parent, your neighbor being slowly squeezed like that, would you stay quiet for the sake of appearances, or would you stand up and fight, willing to deal with the hassle, to protect the last bit of justice this community still has left?